As the courtroom session begins, the air gets heavy. Everyone is trying to act calm, but their eyes say something else. The judge is watching every tiny movement, and the defendant? You can see the nervousness slipping through.
Where a man who once controlled music, media, and billion-dollar rooms now stands at the center of a federal scandal that no one saw coming, not even inside the prison meant to contain him. Early this morning, before the sun even touched the razor-wire fences of FCI Fort Dix, a quiet tension rolled through the corridors. Officers moving faster than usual, radios clicking sharply, a warden stepping out of his office with urgency instead of routine. Something was wrong, deeply wrong, and within minutes it became clear a hidden alcohol setup had been uncovered near Diddy's bunk. Not a small contraband bottle, not a casual violation, a mini production area. Improvised, dangerous, deliberate, sugar, Fanta, apples fermenting in a covered container, the unmistakable smell of homemade alcohol, the kind inmates secretly brew when they think no one is watching.
Pay attention to the defense attorney here. The way he keeps flipping through his papers, that's not routine. That's panic. He knows something unexpected just shifted the balance of this case.
This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a setup used to make alcohol. And inside a federal correctional facility, that's more than a rule break. It's a direct challenge to the system itself. And the moment the evidence was photographed and logged, the warden made a single phone call, straight to the SDNY court in Manhattan. Straight to the one man who has been carrying the weight of this entire case since day one, Judge Aaron Subramanian. Because once this went public, and it did instantly, there was no turning back. The story hit Twitter, then Instagram, then every news site in America. A wildfire of shock, memes, outrage, and disbelief spreading so fast that by 10 a.m., Diddy's name was at the center of the biggest legal storm of the year. And right here, before we go deeper into this unbelievable twist, before going deeper into this video, make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell icon. That's how you'll never miss any breaking updates like this. Now let's get back to the story, because what happens next is the kind of moment that reshapes destinies. Judge Subramanian didn't wait for Monday. He didn't wait for the schedule.
The moment the witness speaks, everything freezes. No one moves. No one whispers. When a room gets this silent, it means every single person feels the impact of what was just revealed.
Marshals were dispatched, and the courtroom lights blinked on before the public even realized what was happening. And as the news spread like wildfire, reporters rushing to Manhattan, courthouse security doubling in minutes, cameras crowding the stairs, one truth became undeniable. Sean "Diddy" Combs, once a global icon, is now facing the most devastating moment of his life, all because of what officials found hidden in the shadows of his prison cell. The moment the discovery report reached SDNY, everything shifted inside Fort Dix. Officers tightened their pace, supervisors gathered in the administrative wing, and a quiet but unmistakable pressure filled the air. The kind of pressure that comes when everyone knows this incident isn't just another prison violation. It's something that could shake the entire federal narrative surrounding Diddy's case. Inside the cell block, inmates whispered among themselves, exchanging glances as guards moved with more urgency than usual. Some looked shocked, others amused, but most stood frozen with the same unspoken realization. Whatever they found near Diddy's bunk, this was serious, far more serious than the usual contraband confiscations that happen every week. And as Diddy was escorted out for questioning, his face told a story of its own. Not anger, not defiance, but a hollow, sinking disbelief. He walked stiffly, eyes fixed forward, lips.
If you're watching closely, you already know this case is far from over. What comes next is even more intense. Make sure you follow, like, and share, because the next chapter gets even wilder.
Evidence bags. Inside them sat the items that changed everything. The sticky Fanta bottle, the sugar packet still half full, the apple pieces wrapped in plastic, and the container whose fermented smell gave away the truth instantly. One officer held up the container and whispered, "This isn't personal use. This is a setup. Someone was making something." Another nodded gravely. and that someone had to know exactly what they were doing. The atmosphere turned colder. This wasn't just a violation, it was an operation. A supervisor wrote his final signature on the violation report, a signature that would trigger the biggest legal reaction Diddy had faced since his sentencing. With one fax, one email, one official transmission, the scandal was out of the prison's hands and now in the courtrooms. Within minutes, the warden stepped out of his office and announced the inevitable. Prepare Combs for federal transport. Outside the building, black vans lined up. Marshals in tactical jackets stood ready. The air felt heavier, as if the prison itself was bracing for impact. A convoy meant for high-security emergencies, now designated for a music mogul whose name once meant luxury and limitless power. Inside one of the vans, Diddy sat silently, hands cuffed, breathing uneven. His mind raced through possibilities. Who discovered it? Who reported it? How this happened? But no matter what thought crossed his mind, every one of them circled back to the same realization. This wasn't going away. This wasn't being swept under a rug. Judge Subramanian was already waiting, already reviewing, already preparing for something far bigger than Diddy ever expected. What began as a discovery inside a dim prison cell was now erupting across the country. News channels clearing broadcast schedules, reporters rushing to SDNY, legal analysts predicting a nightmare outcome. Because when a federal judge decides to reopen a case, especially Diddy's case, it never ends lightly. The convoy rolled through the highway under gray November clouds, but inside the transport van, the silence felt heavier than the sky above it. Diddy stared at the metal wall in front of him, his wrists locked in cold restraints, every bump in the road echoing through the chains. He wasn't speaking. He wasn't asking questions. He wasn't even blinking much. It was the look of a man replaying every decision, every moment, every choice that led to this exact ride. A ride he never imagined for himself. Outside, unmarked black SUVs formed a protective tunnel around the van, lights flashing, sirens off. This wasn't a celebrity escort. This was a containment operation. And as the vehicles approached Manhattan, the world outside shifted. Crowds gathered near barriers. Camera crews stacked on sidewalks. Reporters leaned over railings, shouting questions that Diddy couldn't hear, but he could imagine every word. What did they find in the cell? Is he facing life? Is this the end of Diddy's freedom? The news cycle had already exploded. Television screens across America flashed the same headline. Breaking, alcohol lab discovered near Diddy's bunk. Emergency court hearing today. Inside the courthouse, the tension was even higher. Prosecutors were already there, stacking files, reviewing reports, whispering strategy. Their expressions weren't just serious. They were determined, maybe even angry. To them, this wasn't just a violation. It was an insult, a bold challenge to the integrity of a federal institution. And at the center of all of it was Judge Arun Subramanian. He had arrived early, earlier than anyone. His chamber's door stayed closed, but the staff could feel the sharpness in the air. Every clerk moved quietly. Every assistant avoided unnecessary questions. Everyone knew the judge had spent hours reviewing the evidence. The photos, the testimony, the violation documents, the chain of custody logs. And whenever Judge Subramanian went silent like this, it always meant something big was coming. Meanwhile, Diddy's attorney, Mark Agnifilo, rushed through the courthouse hallway like a man trying to stop a train with his hands. Sweat on his forehead, folder in his arms, but no confidence in his steps. He knew what the judge was capable of. He knew how serious these allegations were. He knew this wasn't just a hearing, it was a reckoning. Outside the courtroom, the doors remained closed as dozens of reporters pressed forward, cameras up, microphones raised. One shouted, "Has Diddy admitted anything?" Another yelled, "Is this a setup?" But no answer came. Inside the holding area, Diddy sat on a steel bench, staring at the floor. His breathing had changed, heavier now, uneven. He whispered something under his breath, maybe a prayer, maybe a question, maybe a regret. But the marshal beside him didn't ask. Then came the moment. A marshal stepped forward, unlocked the inner door, and called out, "Combs, courtroom, now." Diddy stood, slow, shaky, like the weight of the world had attached itself to his shoulders. The chains clinked, the hallway echoed, and with every step he took toward the courtroom, the gravity of the situation grew sharper, colder, and more terrifying. Because once those doors opened, his entire future, whatever was left of it, would be decided in minutes. The courtroom doors opened with a deep, echoing creak, and every sound inside fell into silence as Sean "Diddy" Combs stepped through. It wasn't the confident entrance of a celebrity who once commanded arenas, nor the bold walk of a man fighting for redemption. It was slow, heavy, uncertain. The weight of chains around his wrists was nothing compared to the weight pressing down on his chest. Two federal marshals guided him toward the defendant's table. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but you could feel the energy of 1,000 lenses focused on him from outside. The entire world watching through screens, waiting for every expression, every tremble, every whisper from this room. As Diddy approached his seat, he glanced up for a split second, just enough to see the expression on Judge Arun Subramanian's face. It wasn't anger. It wasn't impatience. It was something much colder, disappointment sharpened with disbelief. And that was far worse. Across the room, prosecutors sat ready, stacks of evidence folders neatly aligned, violation reports in chronological order, photos layered inside clear sleeves. Every officer from Fort Dix who touched the investigation sat in the witness row, uniforms pressed, expressions hard. They weren't here to speculate. They were here to confirm what they found. Diddy swallowed hard. His lawyer, Mark Agnifilo, leaned in and whispered urgently, "Stay calm. Don't react to anything. Just breathe." But even he sounded unsure, his voice shaking beneath years of courtroom polish. The judge finally raised his eyes, looked directly at Diddy, and spoke only two words, "Mr. Combs." A simple address, but his tone made Diddy flinch. Quiet, controlled, deadly serious. The judge continued, "This court did not anticipate seeing you again so soon." A faint, nervous murmur rippled through the gallery. Diddy lowered his eyes, fingers tightening around the edge of the table, knuckles turning white. Judge Subramanian didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "When I handed down your original sentence on October 3rd, I was very clear about one thing. The responsibility placed on you, the expectation, the trust that you would comply fully and completely with the regulations of your confinement." He leaned forward slightly. "And yet, here we are." Prosecutors immediately stood. The lead attorney stepped to the center of the room, holding the first evidence folder. Without any theatrics, he opened it and pulled out the photographs taken inside Fort Dix. The entire courtroom leaned in as the images became visible. The bottle, the fruit mixture, the sugar packets, the sealed container tucked beneath the lower bunk. "Your Honor," the prosecutor said, voice confident and steady, "this setup was not accidental. This was deliberate. This was planned. This was maintained." A guard from Fort Dix approached the stand and raised his hand for an oath. As he spoke, his testimony was calm but chilling. "We found the mixture fully fermenting. That means it had been sitting there for days, maybe weeks." Diddy's chest tightened. Another officer followed. "We discovered sugar and fruit stockpiled in small amounts over time. This was organized." The judge's expression darkened by the second. Agnifilo whispered again, "Don't react. Just listen." But Diddy couldn't hide it. His jaw clenched, eyes blinking rapidly, breath shortening. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a stray item. This was becoming a case of calculated misconduct, and the courtroom could feel it. The air grew thicker. The tension grew sharper. Every passing second pushed Diddy closer to a reality he wasn't prepared to face. Because in this room, with this evidence, under this judge, the consequences were about to become catastrophic. The testimony continued, but the tone of the room was no longer just formal. It was tightening, closing in around Diddy like invisible walls. Every new detail felt like another nail sealing him into a fate he couldn't outrun. A second Fort Dix officer stepped forward, placing a small evidence bag onto the table. Inside was a folded piece of cloth, stained, damp, and smelling faintly of fermented fruit. "This," the officer said, was wrapped around the container to keep it warm at night. Fermentation needs heat. Someone was maintaining it. A low ripple ran through the courtroom. Even the judge shifted slightly in his seat, eyebrows tightening as he studied the bag. Diddy's face drained of color. Another officer approached with a different item, a stack of sugar packets, each stamped with the Fort Dix Dining Hall label. These were taken over time, not all at once. Whoever collected them did it carefully, avoiding detection. Avoiding detection. The words hit Diddy like a punch to the chest. He looked down at his lap, fingers trembling inside the cuffs, his breathing uneven. He shook his head slightly, whispering something no one could hear. Maybe denial, maybe disbelief, maybe a plea only he understood. The prosecutor didn't slow down. "Your Honor," he said, "this was not accidental. This was not spontaneous. This was a system, one that required effort, planning, concealment, and intent." The judge's eyes flicked toward Diddy again. Sharp, controlled, unreadable. Agnifilo finally stood, stepping closer to the bench with a strained expression. "Your Honor, if I may." But the prosecutor cut in immediately. "No, Your Honor. Before the defense speaks, the court must hear this." He picked up a document, a printed statement signed earlier that morning. "This report comes from a Fort Dix lieutenant who conducted the search. According to him, Mr. Combs displayed what he described as nervous behavior and attempted to shift attention away from the bunk area." A whisper swept through the gallery. Diddy lifted his head, eyes wide, panic flickering beneath the surface. "That's not true," he muttered under his breath. Agnifilo leaned in sharply. "Don't speak. Not yet." But the damage was already building. The prosecutor continued reading. The lieutenant also noted that the container was tucked behind Combs' personal property, not in a common area, and that no other inmate claimed ownership. He set the paper down with a deliberate tap. This wasn't accidental. This wasn't planted. This was hidden beside the defendant's personal belongings. The courtroom fell silent. Judge Subramanian leaned back, exhaling slowly. The kind of slow exhale that judges only make when the situation has crossed a line that cannot be unmoved, undone, or softened. And in that silence, the weight of reality crushed down on Diddy. His fingers curled on the table, his shoulders hunched, his eyes glistened but didn't spill over. It wasn't just the evidence. It wasn't just the officers. It wasn't even the prosecutors. It was the judge's reaction. The growing, unmistakable realization that whatever mercy existed in this courtroom, it was disappearing. Agnifilo finally placed a hand on Diddy's arm, whispering tightly, "Stay with me. Don't fall apart now." But Diddy wasn't falling apart. He was sinking into the terrifying truth that this hearing wasn't going to be about mistakes. It was going to be about consequences. And the biggest consequence of his life was waiting just ahead, getting closer with every breath. The prosecution wasn't finished. Not even close. What came next hit the room with even more force, like the slow tightening of a rope around Diddy's future. One of the senior Fort Dix supervisors stepped forward, uniform crisp, posture rigid, carrying a clipboard packed with handwritten notes. He shifted the mic closer and spoke with the kind of tone that carries years of discipline. "Your Honor, this was not the first time we noted concerning behavior from Mr. Combs." Diddy's head snapped up. Agnifilo froze. The judge's expression sharpened. The supervisor continued, eyes locked on the bench. "In the past several weeks, multiple officers documented irregularities during cell checks. Nothing conclusive enough for disciplinary action, but enough to raise concern." He flipped a page. "Unusual foot traffic near Combs' bunk. Late-night activity. Attempts to cover the lower bunk with extra bedding during inspections." The gallery stirred. Quiet gasps, shifting seats, the weight of implication growing heavier by the second. Diddy blinked rapidly, shaking his head, whispering, No, that's not right. That's not... I wasn't..." But the marshal beside him remained still, unmoving, reminding him silently that nothing he said right now would help. The supervisor lifted a final page. "And one more thing, Your Honor." He slid a photograph toward the prosecutor. This was found taped under the bunk frame. The picture was displayed. The entire courtroom leaned in. Diddy's eyes widened. It was a handwritten note. Messy, rushed. A list. Sugar, 6. Fanta, 2. Apples, 3. Wrap cloth, check nights. A grocery list for brewing. A blueprint, a schedule. A punch straight to the heart of the defense. Reporters in the gallery exhaled collectively. Even the judge raised his eyebrows, just slightly, but enough to signal that the significance of this note could not be ignored. Agnifilo stood abruptly. Your Honor, we object to the implication that this note is my client's. But Judge Subramanian cut him off, his voice steady, cold, echoing through the courtroom. Mr. Agnifilo, sit down. Agnifilo froze. Slowly, reluctantly, he sat. The judge turned to the supervisor. This note, was it found within the defendant's assigned bunk area? Yes, Your Honor. Directly beneath his bunk frame. Any evidence another inmate placed it there? No, Your Honor, none. Diddy's shoulders collapsed as if someone had pulled a string from his spine. For a split second, he looked smaller than he ever had. Not the mogul, not the icon, not the legend. Just a man trapped by the weight of undeniable evidence. Prosecutors seized the moment. Your Honor, the lead attorney said, stepping forward with calm precision. This note demonstrates intent. The collected items demonstrate preparation, and the hidden container demonstrates execution. He paused, letting each word land. This is not merely possession of alcohol. This is production, inside a federal facility. Diddy squeezed his eyes shut, jaw trembling. He wasn't crying, not yet, but the collapse was visible. The realization was hitting him with a brutal clarity. He wasn't fighting an accusation anymore. He was fighting a system that now believed he built something inside their walls, a system ready to crush him for it. Across the room, Judge Subramanian leaned back, fingers interlocked, expression unreadable, but his silence spoke volumes, and every second made Diddy's breath heavier. Agnifilo finally whispered, voice cracking, Sean, hold on, we'll speak. We just have to wait. But Diddy didn't answer. He didn't blink. He didn't move. Because deep inside, he knew. This hearing wasn't slipping out of control. It was already gone. The courtroom felt different now. Colder, heavier, like the oxygen had thinned, and every breath Diddy took was scraping against invisible walls. What had started as a disciplinary hearing was transforming into something far more dangerous, and everyone in the room could feel it. Judge Subramanian adjusted his glasses and leaned forward, signaling the next witness. A Fort Dix intelligence officer, the kind who doesn't smile, doesn't blink, doesn't waste words, stepped to the stand. His presence alone sent a ripple of tension through the room. He placed a folder on the witness stand, opened it slowly, and began speaking in a voice that was calm but razor sharp. Your Honor, our investigation did not stop at the alcohol container or the ingredient list. We expanded our internal review. He pulled out a document and held it up. This is a timeline of inmate movement logs and surveillance captures around Mr. Combs' unit for the past month. Diddy's head jerked up. This was something new. Agnifilo stiffened. The officer continued. While Fort Dix does not have cameras inside individual cells, the surrounding hallways and common areas are monitored. In the week leading up to November 7th, we observed unusual movement patterns around the defendant's living area. He pointed to the chart. Same faces, same hours, repeated visits, off-schedule walking routes, inmates lingering longer than normal. The gallery murmured again. Prosecutors exchanged satisfied glances. Agnifilo stepped forward, raising a hand. Your Honor, correlation does not prove involvement, nor does it establish that my client invited. But the officer cut him off politely without emotion. There's more. He slid another set of photographs across the table. The judge lifted them. The courtroom went silent. These weren't photos of alcohol, not ingredients, not notes. They were images of cloth wraps tied around the underside of the bunk, the type inmates used to conceal small items, the type used for hiding contraband during random inspections. A bridge between the earlier evidence and the new allegations. Diddy's face tightened. His lips parted. His fingers twitched in his lap. He wanted to speak, to shout, to explain. But the rules of the courtroom trapped him in silence. The prosecutor turned toward the jury box. Even though this wasn't a jury trial, they used the gesture deliberately, theatrically. Your Honor, these wraps are not standard issue. They are not cleaning cloths. They are cut from shirt fabric. They were tied in a pattern consistent with concealment techniques used by organized inmate groups. The word organized hit Diddy harder than anything else, because it didn't just accuse him of drinking. It accused him of planning, of coordinating, of running something. Judge Subramanian frowned, a deep, troubled frown. The officer continued, steady as stone. Inmates we interviewed described seeing activity near Combs' bunk on multiple nights. They mentioned movement, whispering, and checking the hall. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. Behavior consistent with monitoring for guards. A wave of low whispers filled the courtroom. Reporters scribbled wildly. The energy shifted again, away from doubt, away from debate, towards something like inevitability. Agnifilo looked pale. He whispered to Diddy, "We can still counter this. Stay calm. Don't react." But Diddy was already reacting, inside. His knee bounced uncontrollably. His jaw clenched so hard the muscles pulsed. His eyes darted across the room like he was searching for an exit that didn't exist. Because each word felt like a brick being stacked around him, wall by wall, until he was sealed inside a reality he could no longer argue with. And then the intelligence officer delivered the final blow. Your Honor, based on our assessment, this was not casual possession. He looked directly at the judge. This was a setup, a system, a process. The words dropped into the courtroom like a hammer. A system, a process. Two phrases Diddy never imagined hearing about himself inside a federal courtroom. Judge Subramanian didn't respond immediately, didn't blink, didn't move. He simply sat there, absorbing everything. The evidence, the implications, the patterns, and with each passing second, the sense of danger thickened. Agnifilo's voice cut through the tension, soft but shaken. Your Honor, we request a moment for the defense to respond. But the judge didn't grant it, not yet, because in his eyes, the picture forming was no longer just about alcohol, no longer just about a bottle hidden under a bunk. It was about intent, structure, willful violation, and the man sitting at the defense table, the once untouchable Diddy, realized that the walls closing in weren't imaginary. They were real, and they were almost done closing. The tension inside the courtroom had turned into something almost visible now. Thick, heavy, like a storm cloud pressing down on the people below it. Every breath felt slower. Every sound echoed a little louder. And right in the middle of that storm sat Sean Diddy Combs, staring ahead, shoulders stiff, jaw locked, as the next witness prepared to deliver another blow. This time, it wasn't a guard. It wasn't an intelligence officer. It was someone from the forensic analysis unit, the kind of expert who doesn't speak unless he can prove every syllable with data. He placed a metal evidence tray on the table, and the soft clink of it landing sliced through the room like a blade. Inside the tray, small droplets on swabs, tiny plastic vials, a scraped residue sample, and a printed chemical breakdown. Nothing dramatic, nothing eye-catching, but the type of quiet evidence that destroys entire cases, or entire futures. The expert lifted the paper and began reading with clinical precision. Your Honor, the substance found in Mr. Combs' cell has been tested. The alcohol content was measured at a level consistent with inmate-produced fermented beverages. The mixture contained sugars, fruit acids, yeast traces, and carbonation residue. He paused, glancing over the top of his glasses, indicating it had been prepared deliberately, not accidentally, not incidentally, deliberately. The word echoed, deliberately. Diddy's fingers curled slowly into fists under the table. The expert continued. In addition, we found signs that this was not a one-time mixture. Chemical smudges on the underside of the bunk indicate repeated contact with similar substances over time. This suggests ongoing activity, not an isolated event. A low wave of murmurs rolled across the room. Journalists leaned forward. Cameras clicked. And Diddy, for the first time since the hearing began, looked down at the desk, not up. Because these weren't just accusations anymore. These were scientific confirmations. Cold, emotionless, unforgiving. Agnifilo stood quickly. Your Honor, the presence of residue does not confirm my client made or consumed anything. It could belong to countless inmates. It could, but the expert cut him off gently. We also found fingerprints. Diddy froze. Agnifilo froze. The courtroom froze. The expert clarified. Not a full print, partial smudges, inconsistent pressure, but they contain ridge patterns matching the defendant's known samples. The impact was instant. A reporter gasped. Someone whispered, "Oh my God!" Even the judge's expression shifted, just slightly, but enough to show he understood exactly what this meant. Agnifilo slammed back into the moment. Partial prints are not conclusive, Your Honor. This is speculation. This is not enough to... But Judge Subramanian lifted a hand, stopping him. He turned back to the expert. Are you testifying that the fingerprints were found on the container of the substance? No, Your Honor, the expert replied. On the cloth wraps used to store the containers. Silence again. Heavy, dragging. Agnifilo's voice cracked for the first time. That doesn't prove he knew what was inside. But the expert wasn't done. We also recovered micro-scratches on the inner surface of the plastic, consistent with someone using their nails to open the seal, and those scratches contain DNA traces. The world tilted for Diddy in that moment, because this wasn't a rumor, wasn't a witness statement, wasn't prison gossip. This was biology, science, evidence that couldn't be argued with or intimidated. The prosecutor stood and delivered the line that shattered whatever hope was left. Your Honor, this establishes direct physical involvement, not accidental presence, not circumstantial contact, direct participation. Diddy's eyes closed, not out of guilt, out of realization. Realization that even if he tried to defend himself, even if he tried to speak, even if he tried to explain, the gravity of this evidence had already dug its place into the courtroom floor. He opened his eyes again, slowly, and looked toward Judge Subramanian. The judge wasn't looking at him. Not yet. He was scanning the documents, weighing the evidence, building a narrative brick by brick, and every brick felt like it was being placed on Diddy's chest. Agnifilo leaned close, whispering urgently, "Don't react. Don't move. Don't say anything. We can still fight this." But Diddy didn't seem to hear him. His mind was racing. Images of his trial, the witnesses, the sentencing, the cameras, Cassie, the headlines, the weight of his empire collapsing piece by piece. And now this. This wasn't a scandal anymore. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a warning. It was the kind of evidence that forced a judge's hand, the kind that changed destinies, the kind that could turn a 4-year sentence into life behind bars. And everyone in that courtroom knew exactly where the hearing was heading now. Straight toward the moment that would define the rest of Diddy's life. The courtroom had become so silent that even the soft hum of the overhead lights felt loud. Every eye was fixed on Judge Aaron Subramanian as he adjusted his glasses, leaned back slowly in his chair, and exhaled. The kind of exhale a judge gives when the weight of a decision is heavier than the courtroom can contain. Diddy's chest rose and fell in short, tight breaths, his fingers pressed into the edge of the defense table. Agnifilo whispered something, maybe reassurance, maybe preparation, but Diddy didn't respond. His eyes were locked on the judge, searching for even a small clue of hope. There was none. Judge Subramanian lifted the stack of reports, photographs, chemical breakdowns, disciplinary logs, and violation summaries. He held them like a final tally, an entire chapter of a man's life reduced to paper. He began speaking, slowly, deliberately, each word slicing through the silence. Mr. Combs, this court has reviewed your prior sentence, your behavior reports, your disciplinary records, and the evidence presented here today. The room tightened. Journalists leaned forward. Cameras tilted up. People stopped blinking. The judge continued. You were given a federal sentence on October 3rd, 2025, 4 years and 2 months, under strict supervision and strict correctional guidelines. You were warned. Repeatedly. Diddy swallowed hard. You were told that any violation, any misconduct, any breach of federal correctional rules would result in immediate and severe consequences. He paused, not for theatrics, but because the next line changed everything. And yet, despite all warnings, despite the gravity of your original case, you chose to commit deliberate acts inside a federal facility. Diddy's head dropped for a moment, but the judge wasn't done. The alcohol discovered in your cell, the storage methods, the residue patterns, the fingerprints, the DNA traces, all of it demonstrates not an accident, not proximity, not misunderstanding, but direct participation. Agnifilo stood halfway, voice shaking. Your Honor, the evidence is... Judge Subramanian did not even look at him. Sit down, Mr. Agnifilo. The defense lawyer froze, then slowly lowered himself back into his seat. The judge leaned forward again, voice low, unwavering. Mr. Combs, you have violated the terms of your confinement. You have violated federal correctional law. You have violated the trust of this court. And this latest act is not an isolated lapse. It is part of a continuing pattern. The words continuing pattern echoed in Diddy's mind like a slow, collapsing heartbeat. The judge picked up the final set of pages, the sentencing order, and read the line that would send shockwaves across the nation. Therefore, this court finds that your actions justify the maximum allowable correctional consequence under federal statute. Silence, absolute silence. Diddy's hands shook. The judge looked him directly in the eyes. Mr. Combs, your original sentence is hereby vacated. A ripple of gasps shot through the room. Agnifilo's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The judge continued, steady and devastating. You are now sentenced to life imprisonment. The journalist went wild, pens flying, keyboards hammering, whispered exclamations erupting through the benches. A guard grabbed the doorframe, stunned. Even the prosecutor blinked twice, absorbing the finality of those words. Diddy's entire body stiffened as if the sentence struck him physically. He closed his eyes, not to hide tears, but because the reality felt too sharp to look at. Around him, the courtroom became a storm. Cameras clicked like gunfire. Reporters whispered, "Life sentence! Life!" Observers leaned back in disbelief, and guards moved closer, preparing to take Diddy away. But the judge wasn't finished. He added softly, but with the force of a hammer, "This sentence is effective immediately. You will be transferred to a high-security federal facility. There will be no bail, no delay, no extension." Agnifilo rose again, desperate. Your Honor, we request... Denied. The judge struck the gavel once. The sound echoed like a final door slamming shut. Diddy opened his eyes slowly, staring forward with a hollow expression. A man watching the last remaining pieces of his empire, his legacy, his future, fall apart in front of him. The guards moved in. One placed a hand on his shoulder. Another unlocked the restraints. Another prepared the transport cuffs. Diddy didn't resist. He didn't argue. He didn't even look back at the courtroom. Because in that single moment, as the world erupted around him, he understood. This wasn't a scandal anymore. This wasn't a hearing. This wasn't a viral story. This was the end. And it would define him forever. The courtroom was still shaking from the shock of the judge's words. Reporters were scrambling to get their microphones closer. Guards were repositioning themselves, and the soft chatter of disbelief rippled through every corner of the room. But beneath all that noise, one person felt the crushing weight more than anyone else. Sean Diddy Combs. As the guards tightened the restraints on his wrists, Diddy lifted his head slowly, trying to gather enough courage to breathe. His throat felt tight. His heartbeat wasn't just fast. It was uneven, like he was fighting his own body just to stay standing. Life imprisonment. The words wouldn't leave his mind. They kept circling, repeating, getting louder. This was the moment he feared, the moment everyone said would never actually happen. Judge Aran Subramanian remained seated, watching Diddy with an expression mixed with firmness and quiet disappointment. Not anger, not rage, just a heavy recognition of how far things had spiraled. Across the aisle, the prosecutors began gathering their files, whispering to each other with the energy of people who had just witnessed a seismic shift in a high-profile case. Some looked triumphant, others simply stunned. One of them glanced at Diddy with a soft, almost sympathetic stare, perhaps realizing that despite all the legal battles and courtroom theatrics, this was still a human being who had just lost the rest of his life. Agnifilo stepped toward Diddy, lowering his voice so only he could hear. "We'll appeal. We will fight this. This isn't where it ends, I promise you." But even he didn't sound convinced. His hands trembled slightly and his eyes darted toward the judge, as if searching for any sign of reconsideration. There was none. Diddy didn't respond. He kept his gaze locked on the courtroom floor, a glossy wood surface that reflected a blur of lights, shadows, and feet moving hurriedly. He blinked, and for a second, it looked like his eyes glistened. Not dramatic tears, not loud crying, just the quiet breaking of someone who finally understood he wasn't walking out of this building as the same man who entered. A marshal stepped behind him. "Mr. Combs, we need to move." Diddy's shoulders stiffened. It was happening. Right now. He took one slow step, then another. The courtroom doors seemed farther away than ever, like a tunnel narrowing with every inch. Behind him, Judge Subramanian spoke again. Not to him, but to the record, to the public, to history. "This court is adjourned." The gavel hit again, this time softer but more final, like a curtain closing on a chapter of American celebrity culture. Phones shot up instantly. Flashlights burst. The news cycle ignited at that very second. The world outside didn't know yet, but they were about to. As Diddy reached the doorway, he paused for just half a breath. Maybe he wanted to turn around. Maybe he wanted to see who was watching him fall. Maybe he wanted to stare one last time at the judge who had just rewritten his future. But he didn't. He kept walking. Because deep down he knew something he couldn't say out loud. He wasn't just losing his freedom. He was losing the final piece of the person he used to be. The marshals guided him down the hallway, a long, dim corridor lined with federal seals and framed court documents. Every footstep echoed like a countdown. The whispers from inside the courtroom grew faint as the door swung shut behind them. Ahead, the transport elevator waited. The metal doors reflected his image back at him. A man who once stood on stadium stages, in mansions, on red carpets. Now handcuffed, hollow-eyed, and headed into permanent custody. One marshal pressed the button. The elevator opened with a mechanical sigh. Diddy stepped inside. This was no longer a scandal, a trending hashtag, or a breaking news segment. This was his life now. And the world was about to watch what happens to a fallen empire when there's no path left except downward. The courtroom fell into a silence so heavy it almost felt physical, a pressure pushing against every wall, every breath, every heartbeat. Judge Arun Subramanian leaned forward, removing his glasses with a slow, deliberate motion that signaled something far more serious than a routine sentencing update. Even the air seemed to freeze. Diddy, standing between two federal marshals, didn't blink. His eyes were locked on the judge, searching for even a flicker of hope, some sign that this nightmare would stop escalating. But the judge's face held none. No softness, no hesitation. Only the weight of a decision that would rewrite the rest of Diddy's life. "Mr. Combs," the judge began, his voice low but carrying through the courtroom like a single strike of thunder. "After reviewing the evidence presented regarding the contraband found within your assigned housing unit, after reviewing the statements, the photographs, the hidden fermentation setup, and the formal reports." Every person in the room leaned in. "This court finds that you have engaged in repeated violations of federal correctional standards." Diddy's jaw tightened. A tiny tremor ran down his left hand, almost unnoticeable, but not to the marshals who stood inches away from him. Judge Subramanian continued, his tone sharpening. "You were given a federal sentence on October 3rd. You were warned, explicitly, that any violation would be taken extremely seriously, and yet within weeks you were found in possession of and reportedly consuming illicitly produced alcohol." A murmur rippled across the gallery. Cameras clicked. Someone gasped. Another whispered, "He's done!" The judge raised a hand, calming the room. But what troubles this court even more, he said, is that this was not an isolated lapse in judgment. Evidence presented today suggests a pattern, a deliberate, knowing disregard for the rules of this institution. Diddy's eyes widened for the first time. He inhaled sharply, as if the words physically pierced him. Agnephilo stepped forward, whispering urgently, "Stay calm, stay calm." But Diddy wasn't calm. His breathing quickened. His shoulders rose and fell as he tried to hold himself together. The judge looked directly into his eyes, not with anger, but with the heavy finality of someone who had already made peace with the consequences of the choice he was about to deliver. "Therefore," he said, voice deepening, "this court has determined that your prior sentence is insufficient." The room erupted, gasps, muffled shouts, camera shutters snapping in rapid-fire bursts. Diddy took an involuntary step back, his cuffed hands clenched. For the first time, true fear flashed across his face. Not confusion, not disbelief, but fear. Judge Subramanian's next words landed like a falling hammer. Effective immediately, you are hereby sentenced to life in federal prison. A woman in the gallery cried out. A reporter dropped their notebook. Someone whispered, "No way, no way." Diddy's eyes filled instantly, not with tears rolling down, but with a shimmer, a raw tremble of a man whose world had suddenly collapsed in on itself. His lips parted, but no sound came out. His shoulders sagged. Every bit of energy drained from his face like a candle being blown out. The marshal behind him steadied him as his legs weakened. Agnephilo stared at the judge as if he were seeing a ghost. "Your Honor, this is extreme," he stammered. The judge cut him off. "This court will not tolerate repeated misconduct. Mr. Combs poses a continual disciplinary threat within the federal system. The rule of law does not bend for fame, status, or wealth." Diddy closed his eyes. A single tear finally broke free, sliding down his cheek. He didn't wipe it. He didn't move. He just stood there. A man who once ruled music, media, business, culture, now standing alone, stripped of every advantage he once thought would protect him. Judge Subramanian delivered the final line with a gravity that left the entire courtroom breathless. "This court is adjourned." The gavel struck, a sound like the end of a life.